Hey there, everyone. Scott Mance here. Big thanks to everyone for joining us for the Landmark Theater's Retro Replay screening series 1999, the year that changed cinema, featuring on this very, very special night, 1999's The Blair Witch Project. And joining us for this conversation, we have co-directors Eduardo Sanchez, Daniel Myrick, co-producer Mike Manello, and producer Greg Hale. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here, and happy 25th anniversary to the Blair Witch Project.
Well, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you. Great
having
to be
us.
here.
All right, so I want to start with Dan here. Just what is your take on just overall 1999, how it just was an incredibly amazing year, and the placing of the Blair Witch Project in it?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it was a huge year for us. We had been, hammering away at our little indie movie for quite some time, and it was just, it was a great time to be an independent film in those days. There was just a lot of great films coming out, a lot of great filmmakers at that time, and it was really before the internet really sort of took over everything else and streaming and all that. So it was just, it was very raw and an honest time to be a filmmaker, and we were really fortunate to be a part of it.
What was it like to be a part of that, Ed?
I mean, it was crazy for us because we were, like Dan said, we were just like, broke, independent filmmakers. And then all of a sudden we're like, at Cannes with Ron Howard and, Spike Lee and, it's just nuts. So, it was quite an experience. And then just all the crazy, great movies of 1999. It's unbelievable. My list, just like the list of how many great movies came out. And we were just lucky to have been released at that time. So, again, like Dan said, we just felt like lucky to be a part of it.
So Greg, how did you first meet Ed and Dan, and what was your first impression of like this movie that they were taking on, which had never ever been done before?
Yeah, well, we all went to UCF together, University of Central Florida together, and we had actually all graduated, and I was just looking for a project to do. So Dan and I were just sitting around, throwing ideas around constantly. Kind of offhand, Dan one night was like, "Hey, Ed and I came up with this idea when we were, back at UCF. These kids go into the woods and it's a witch and they're investigating a witch and they find some weird stuff in the woods and then they end up in this house and then they never come out." And it's like really like almost that simple of a pitch. And kind of the hackles on the back of my neck went up and I was like, I want to be involved. Like no matter what, I had never produced anything except to the extent that everybody produces their own stuff in film school. And I'm like, whatever I got to do, I want in. So yeah, it was a very, very quick decision for me to get involved.
Mike, you're shaking your head in unison here with the conversation here. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I was kind of helping the guys even before on the early stages. I remember Dan called me up, and I think at the time I was the only one with a computer. I don't think Greg, you had a personal computer yet at the time, because I remember unplugging my Mac that I had and bringing it over to the office. I think it sit there for a few days while Greg was working on the very first version of the investor kit. And so I was kind of hanging around, but I didn't really join officially until after the movie was shot and before it was edited. So I was kind of like on the sidelines cheering and basically doing whatever I could to help out until then. But it was clear film projects work on momentum, and it just felt like this one. Greg was incredible as a producer about maintaining momentum and that sense of momentum that like once it starts going, he just pushes and pushes. And I really think that that's exactly what an indie film needs.
I'm really curious. So when I first saw the film, and I was at Sundance in '99, but when I heard about the film, like the cat was out of the bag, and I could not get into a screening until, well, closer to the film's release in that summer. But I always wondered, was it always the plan, Dan, to do it as a found footage movie? Was there ever conversations while you were building the mythology of the Blair Witch and the legend of it all that you were just going to do it as a narrative feature?
Yeah, I mean, it was always a fictional premise, and we knew we wanted it to look and feel like a documentary from the early inception of the idea. But we had one version of the film that was more structured like a typical documentary, where you would have, talking heads and analysis of the footage and stuff like that, and that the found footage portion, the portion where the students shot their own stuff, would constitute maybe 20 or 30 minutes of the final film. So that was the big shift for us, is it went from being, a more of a traditional documentary style film to all found footage towards the end in the edit process. But it being a documentary, it being sort of a fact or fiction thing, it was always, I think, from the very beginning, even when we were doing the investor reel, we even portrayed that as a legit, that Paxson was a real company, that we found this footage and we were going to release it. So that's really kind of our hook, frankly, was getting people to believe that we had this footage that we were going to release.
So, Adam, I'm really curious. Say, when it comes to your three actors, they're not just acting. They're your shooters, your directors of photography. They're doing a lot. So what made Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Josh Leonard like the three? What made you go, okay, we found our cast?
Well, we auditioned like, in LA a little bit and Orlando and even DC, but New York was really like the main place where, unsigned, untapped talent and also non-union talent, because we knew that we couldn't do anything union with the way we were going to shoot it. So and we just, we got a lot of people. We auditioned like probably almost 1,000 people for this movie, and there's just something about them that kind of just, Dan and I remember when we first saw Josh, that was the first person we cast. We looked at each other and we're like, all right, I guess we got one of our leads, and then just started playing them off each other. And we were down to about like a dozen people, like maybe 3 or 4 people for each role. And then, it really just Heather and Mike and Josh, just the combination for us just felt right. And we felt like, they were like kind of freaking us out a little bit in this rehearsal space in New York with the AC running and, obviously not in the middle of the woods. So we were like, man, if we put these people in the woods and like, isolate them and start messing with them, they're going to probably come up with some cool stuff. So it was just kind of a gut reaction that both Dan and I agreed. It was like, yeah, these are the three.
So, okay, so Greg, so you got your actors. This is a true independent film with a capital IF, and no money, this completely bold, daring narrative structure. What were the initial producing challenges you had before you could get to Maryland and start shooting?
Well, raising money. Dan mentioned the investor tape. We had this amazing investor reel that, like Dan was saying, like presented it like a real story. And we were doing like the classic, get 20 dentists in a room and pitch them the idea and hope that they give you some money, right? Because I think we had budgeted the movie at like $350,000, $400,000, something like that at that time. And we would show them this investor reel, and it fooled every one of them. People would be freaked out, and we'd be say, surprise, it's a narrative film, and we want you to invest, and they would say no. So we were really struggling to raise money, and then Dan shot a segment for John Pearson's Split Screen. Remember that show?
Yeah, sure.
So Dan was DP for John on a segment for Split Screen, gave John the investor reel, and it fooled John Pearson. And John Pearson was so impressed that we had fooled him and was so freaked out by the investor tape that he's like, I'll pre-buy 2 episodes for Split Screen based on this. I'll give you $10,000, 5,000 for each segment. One, just show your investor reel. That's a segment. And then after you guys shoot the movie, edit together another episode for us. And that was literally half our budget. So John got us half of our budget. And then we scraped together, with a lot of help from Rob Cowie, the other producer, scraped together the other $12,000 for the $22,000 shooting budget.
And what was that shooting that sort of sizzle, if you will, and the reaction that John had to it that made you go, okay, we are on to something here. Let's really move forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, fooling John Pearson and getting John Pearson, enthused was definitely a giant boost for us. But I think at that point we were determined to make the movie one way or the other. But John really kind of pushed it over the edge in a lot of ways.
So Dan, tell me about the first talks you had with Heather and Josh and Michael Williams about, okay, this is what we need you to do. Um, this is more than just like, okay, action, you shoot your scene and cut, go back to your trailer kind of thing. What was their take on just how immersive and how hands-on they were going to have to be, and they were really gonna have to multitask. How did you sort of prep them for all of that?
Well, it was sort of a collective effort because we kind of went in, even as late as 3 or 4 days before shooting, not 100% clear on what the ending was going to be. And, we knew we were going to have sort of this real time process by which, we had these kind of markers throughout the woods where the actors would navigate via GPS, because Greg had some military experience and he showed us these GPS devices. So we told them that that's how they were going to navigate through the woods, unassisted by any crew or anything like that. So, and also their characters, their profiles and what knowledge their characters would have. We try to remain true to that methodology as well. So we didn't brief them too much on backstory on the Blair Witch, like in particular, like Josh and Mike wouldn't know that much about the Blair Witch backstory, where Heather would. So we try to keep all that in character as well. So they really embraced that approach. I mean, it was a fun experimental kind of different way of making a movie. And outside of the sort of the anxiety of not really knowing if this was going to work or not, it was, like camping out for 7 days.
Yeah.
It was definitely tough at times because it was cold and rained, and Heather, to her credit, like was a little bit hesitant about first coming out and doing this movie with a bunch of dudes in the woods. So she understandably was a little cautious. But once they sort of got into the rhythm of it and understood that we weren't out to kill them or anything, it was pretty incredible to see their performances. We were able to monitor them as they navigated through the woods. Ed and Greg and I were sort of shadowing them, and then we'd review the tapes when they got done with the tape, and we could kind of make adjustments along the way. But it was incredible the amount of material that they gave us and
Wow.
how in character they would stay while they were doing their thing, and at the same time having to pitch a tent and live on sort of rations throughout like the back half of the show. But yeah, they were real troopers through it, and I think their performances kind of speak for themselves. They really embraced it. They dived 100% into the characters and really delivered.
So Mike, what as you were observing like what was happening with how far that they had gotten, the team had gotten to the point where we're filming this. This is really happening. What was your impression by this point that this is really going to come together?
I thought when the guys got back, I went into the edit room with Ed and Greg. I think it was like the first time they were going to just scan through some of the footage and look at. I mean, I think they had seen it before, but we got it transferred and it was in there, and we started scanning through, and Ed was just sitting there pulling some scenes, scrolling through in the Avid and pulling select scenes. And it was just clear that I think, at the time, the original conception was that this would maybe be 25 minutes of the movie, and the rest of it would be kind of documentary style. And it was clear that there was a bounty of treasures there. It wasn't clear that the film would be what it was, but it was definitely clear that what had been captured was great.
So Ed, I'm curious, like when the first day, do you remember the first scenes that were shot? And do you remember looking at the footage on that very first day? What were some of the some of the scenes that were shot on that first day where you and Dan and Greg looked at each other and went, this is gold. These moments are gold.
I mean, we were just so busy with because it was a 24-hour a day shoot. So we were just like busy trying to, keep them safe and guiding them. The first day was crazy because we were like, driving them around. We started at, supposedly Heather's house, and then we went to store, 7-Eleven, and, all these places that they stopped, and then all the documentaries and in Burkittsville and stuff. All the interviews. So it was just like, a lot of logistical stuff. And we didn't really, I don't think we looked at the footage. It didn't have any time. But the whole time, I mean, we knew we were doing something special. We knew we were doing something that had never been done before, but we never thought that we were like, I remember telling, Dan and I talking, it's like, it's going to either be the best movie ever, or it's just going to be the biggest piece of crap we've ever seen. Cause we didn't know if it was going to work or not. I think the first time, I mean, we knew that the actors were good, and we cast and took a while to cast, and we knew they were doing, other than adjusting, like Heather, like telling her if, when you're walking, or try to keep the camera zoomed out as much as possible, because, anything, her first couple of days of footage was just like zoomed in walking, and it was just like, you can't, you got to stay zoomed out unless you're like going into something for a close-up. Just kind of technical stuff like that. And then, Mike was having trouble with the dad, just trying to, review stuff with his big dad. And it was just, giving him issues. But I think the first time we saw something where, at least for me, like, I think we were like shocked was, later in the shoot, when the map scene with Mike, when he kicked the map because we had not scripted that.
You know what? I kicked the. I'm sorry, it's fucked up. It's fucked up, but I kicked that fucking map into the creek yesterday. It was useless. I kicked that fucker into the creek.
That was like totally improvisation. Well, Mike happened to kick the thing in the creek, the map into the creek, and he didn't, the other people didn't see him, and he just kept this secret. So that moment for us as filmmakers was like the first time that, obviously we saw there was some good stuff, but that one was like the first time, at least for me, where I was like, man, we might have something like really special here. Because if it's freaking us out and it's making us, pushing us to the edge of our seats, then how's it going to be for somebody that doesn't know any of the background of this and thinks that this is real footage? So I think that scene was the scene that, really impressed us, just to say, oh man, we might have something here.
So Dan, I'm curious, like, how did you direct these three actors? I mean, how did you, you couldn't really shatter the illusion, and they're in character, they're staying in character. So I'm guessing that you probably wanted to just like keep your distance as much as possible. So how are you able to give them direction without it being like a typical film set where, you're in each other's faces all day, where you're keeping your distance? And I understand you kind of gave them notes and left things for them, like a sort of a trail. How did all that work?
Well, it was again, the goal was to try to keep them in character as much as possible and not be aware of the film process. So we would camp next to their camp, within shouting distance of where they camped every night, and we would try to monitor and listen to them. Ed and I were in like full fatigues, kind of hiding in the bushes, watching them and their performances as much as we could. And we didn't know where the camera was going to pan, so we didn't want them, showing two directors standing off in the woods. So we had to kind of be camouflaged. So that was part of our process. We would listen and try to shadow them along the way, but that broke down periodically. That was kind of impossible to do. And then the other way is that we would monitor them with the tapes that they shot, and they were basically our version of dailies. So we could review what they shot each day. Like Ed mentioned, that Heather was too zoomed in on a lot of stuff, so we had to kind of go back and talk to her about keeping everything wide. And then we had this process of these three film canisters, the old 35 millimeter film canisters that we used to put directing notes in, so we could make adjustments with their performances and also set them up, like throughout the day. An example would be that, and they were all instructed not to reach each other's notes. So they'd be halfway through the day, and Heather was told to, in her first person, that you need to go south all day. do not turn around, don't listen to anybody else, just stay focused on heading south all day. And then Josh would be told just the opposite, like sometime during the day, take control. And so that was our way of like controlling the narrative that we had scripted prior, but also allowing the actors, when it felt right to them, to kind of have that conflict. So that was an attempt to kind of preserve that spontaneity, but still have control, directorial control over the process. And then, like most documentaries, a lot of the direction came in the edit. So, when Ed and I sat down and looked at all that footage, we, the first process was just to get rid of everything that didn't work, that felt contrived and scripted, and then just kind of get it down to a lump of stuff that feels like it's working. And then how do we construct, a more refined narrative out of that? So that was pretty cool because it had sort of this documentary DNA in that regard, where we were able to control the narrative, but it kind of came to life even more so in the edit. So yeah, that's basically the way we were able to kind of not go too far off the rails.
So Greg, I'm curious, like when you first sort of all got together, I had read the script, if you will, was like 30 pages, 25 pages, really, really loose. So how did the early footage that you shot in the first couple of days sort of make you pivot into a direction that wasn't in the script? Like how did sort of you look at the early footage and take it in a different direction? Like what inspired you about the earlier footage to sort of go the way you did leading up until the end of the film?
Well, the main thing for me as a producer is we didn't have an ending. until like the day before we shot the ending. And even then, at the time, we didn't even really know what it meant, but we were just, winging it.
Desperate.
I think the biggest adjustment that we made was really Dan and Ed watching the performances and trying to honestly mitigate the conflict. I think with improvisation, a lot of times actors tend to go toward conflict as a way of moving scenes forward. I think that's just a natural thing that you do in improvisational stuff. And we had to mitigate that somewhat. So Dan and Ed were kind of massaging the relationship between the three actors. We didn't really change anything story wise because that stuff was all pretty baked in and we had all that stuff prepped in advance. But, initially, Mike was going to be the one who disappeared. Instead of Josh. That was the way we had originally concepted it. But Heather and Josh, to say that they butted heads would be an understatement. And we're like, okay, if it's just Heather and Josh, this is going to be nothing but a match for the rest of the show. So we pulled Josh out, and he wanted to go to see Jane's Addiction anyway. So he was like, cool.
Yeah, he was ready to get the hell out of there for sure.
And they were all ready to get the hell out of the wood. So I think that was probably the biggest adjustment was like get Josh the hell out of there.
All right, so Ed, the image of Heather shooting her monologue with that close up has become the defining image of this movie. It is certainly as the internet really took over the memes of it, but it's like whenever that movie is mentioned in any kind of article, written, print, or online, it's that image of the close-up with the tear and her wearing the beanie. What was it like when you first saw the footage of that monologue?
It was just another one of those moments where we were just shocked and like amazed and really taken in completely by the performance. And I remember, I think it was just Dan, I don't know who was there. Dan was probably there, but it was that, during we had the Avid and we were just rolling through the footage and we found this and it was just kind of amazing. It was just, we had never seen anything like that. And we were just like really absorbed, into it. And we were really like kind of invested in like all of a sudden, like my God, this is a real character, doing this. And also just how courageous it was. Like we, especially Heather, like Dan said, it's like this, this is just basically a bunch of guys going into the woods and shooting something. and Heather was the only woman from, in the main part of the crew. There was a couple other, women that were like PAs and stuff, but that, part of the whole crew was mostly just dudes, and not many people, but it was all dudes. So just the bravery that she had to kind of just to go out there, but also just to like lay it all out in front of the camera and have, snot coming out of her nose. And it's just, we were just amazed.
I am so sorry for everything that has happened. Because in spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault. Because it was my project. And I insisted.
And we had never seen anything like it. And I think Dan and we were like silent for a little while. And then we obviously wanted to show the rest of the guys, the other people, the footage. But that's when we knew that there was, again, another like little beat of like, man, this is something very compelling, and and we might have like a real movie here, so it was just very encouraging, and just like we were kind of just, our jaws were up on the floor just watching this performance. And and it was a lot longer than it is in the movie, but it was just totally we were just totally immersed in this. It's crazy.
So Mike, 7-8 days of filming all this footage, and now you're spending 7-8 months editing it down. What were the biggest challenges to edit down all of this footage into a first cut that I think was 2.5 hours, and then into a final cut that's about 85 minutes?
Yeah, well, the film underwent a radical change during that time, because originally, like you said, it was going to be, that footage that was shot in the woods was going to be wrapped with more traditional feeling documentary footage. And in fact, if you watch Curse of the Blair Witch, which aired on Sci-Fi Channel right before the movie came out in the theater, that is structured more like what I think we all thought the original feature film would be. But so the guys, Ed and Dan, cut it down to about 2.5 hours, and the goal for that cut was take out anything that doesn't feel authentic or real or just doesn't push the narrative forward. And so what was left was 2.5 hours. I think by then, I remember Ed kind of being like, it's getting hard for me to even recognize what's real and what's not anymore. And so we thought, hey, well, we had an independent art house cinema in town that was not for profit, and they let us use it one Saturday afternoon for a screening before they opened up. And they were the only theater in town that had a video projector. So we could, I remember like the night before, Ed and Dan burned off a 2.5 hour tape. I think we even had a tape change, right?
It was two tapes.
So we had
two
tapes, and we went to there, and we had invited friends and friends of friends. We asked our friends to invite people they knew who maybe didn't know us. And we were trying to not overfeed what we wanted from the audience. We wanted to get raw audience opinions. And I remember like right before, like when it was time to burn off, we were like, oh, how are we going to introduce this? What are we going to say? And Ed just like quickly wrote up that title card that actually begins the film. And that was originally written as a way to just give the audience of this test screening a little bit of enough context to watch the movie and give us feedback. But we didn't even think this was the final form of the movie. For us, we were looking for like what scenes were playing, where were they getting bored, what didn't feel real. Those were the questions we were asking. But all the responses from that screening were talking about the movie as a piece, as an entire piece. And that was really kind of intriguing to us, but still wasn't enough to convince us. So the guys cut more, and we kept cutting and cutting. And then we started shooting phase 2. So we shot the Rustin Parr newsreel that's in Curse of the Blair Witch. We shot the Mystic Occurrences, which is a riff on In Search Of. Yeah. And we shot some interviews and things like that. And then the guy started trying to cut that into the film. And I think I don't know how long it was, guys, but over time, Ed and Dan started to split. And Dan was trying to cut a version with the footage in, and Ed was trying to cut a version that's just the footage, because we really genuinely weren't sure it was going to work. And that was tough because then we ultimately had to come together and have this big discussion about what is the film going to be? Is it going to be this documentary thing, which at the time we thought was going to be more commercial, like a more commercial way to present this film, versus this other thing, this other beast that we had that really had kind of been discovered in the edit, the film as it was. And you know, we realized that it worked. I mean, ultimately, we made the decision to cut all of the what we called phase two and just go in the direction of that. And it was pretty late because then the guys started cutting that version, and we got a. I don't even think it was entirely. It was like as finished as it could be by the Sundance deadline, and we had to burn a tape and ship it out like on the last deadline. And then they continued to work on the film after we submitted the tape to Sundance. So. But by the time we were ready to edit, by the time we were ready to submit and think about our film festival schedule plan and all that, we had decided to cut that footage. And, you know, I don't think any of us knew what was going to happen to it, but it was kind of amazing once Artisan was like, hey, we can make a deal with Sci-Fi and they want to do a behind the scenes, but we don't want to do a behind the scenes. And we're like, whoa, we know what to do. And you know, and we found that it worked. It worked when you were using the clips very sparingly and you had all the documentary stuff, but it would have required us to cut so many great moments out of the footage that the actors filmed of themselves. And I think that was the tension because when it was like a 50-50 mix, or if you were trying to go heavier on that, the documentary footage just kind of killed the momentum.
Right.
You know, it's almost like the two narratives were competing against each other.
So Dan, you had your Sundance premiere on January 23rd, 1999. What was that night like?
It was pretty nerve-wracking. I mean, the first screening of The Egyptian was a midnight screening. There was a lot of, you know, buzz going into Sundance. We were pretty fortunate with having representation. So they set up a lot of meetings for some pre-meetings with distributors and stuff like that. So we were so naive. We had no idea what was the norm or what wasn't. And we were just kind of going into this kind of maelstrom of, you know, indie craziness. But that night, I remember we were very excited and there was a lot of anticipation. There was this big line around the building at the Egyptian. But it was really like, I remember Ed and I sort of went to the restroom at the Egyptian, excuse me, and looking at each other and saying, okay, this is it, dude. You know, this is really all that work that we've been doing, all of us together. This is sort of the make or break moment. That's at least the way we perceived it. You know, it's being screened, not for friends and family, not for just a general group of people you know, in our hometown. This is like buyers are coming to check out our film, and will we sink or swim at this moment? So it was a lot of pressure, a lot of it self-imposed, but there's a lot of pressure on that particular screening. So it was a mixture of real excitement that we got into Sundance. We had great anticipation. Our reps were all excited. But as artists and filmmakers, it's really the moment where you determine whether you're worthy or not. If someone wants to buy your film. Unfortunately, after it screened, it got a good reception, and there was several people in the mix that were wanting to buy the film or negotiate. So that went on all night. And Greg could speak to more of that because Greg and was involved with the negotiations while Ed and I sort of kind of held back. But so yeah, we had an amazing time, and you'll never have that first time at Sundance, and and for us it was a crazy time, and it was awesome for the actors, and we next day we woke up we had sold our movie. We were the first ones to sell that year, and that was quite the relief for us, because then we could just sort of like enjoy the whole experience rather than like, are we going to sell or not? Blah, blah, blah. That was all behind us. We could just sort of enjoy ourselves. And that was when it really became fun for me.
Yeah. So Greg, I just got a couple more questions here. Greg, when this movie really was going through that Sundance to release process, you know, the internet was, at least publicly, I mean, it'd been around for a long, long time, but for commercial use, it was really new. I mean, I remember I had AOL and I had the dial in with the modem that made that horrible piercing sound that like most millennials will never, never experience. Good for them. But Greg, what was it like when the marketing of the film really blurred the lines between a film and actual footage?
Yeah, I mean, there was we always approached it as, is it real? Right? Like we pitched it to the investors as a real thing. Um, with Jeremy Walker's help and all our reps' help, we kind of emulated that same "Is it real" campaign at Sundance. We had the missing posters that we put up at Sundance. So that was always our intent, kind of blurring that line. I think the biggest, like, just total serendipity thing was that Ed could code HTML.
Well, sort of. Yeah.
Well, but back in the day, like you had to be able to code to build a website, and it was not a common skill. And Ed had learned it from your cousin's business, right, Ed?
Yeah, yeah. I have fortunately had some internet experience. Yeah.
So Ed could build a website, and Mike kind of knew marketing. So it just kind of happenstance that on the team we had the ability to get it on the internet. And then I think Ed and Mike especially understood just innately that building of a community, and which is really kind of that momentum started even, really with John Pearson,
Yeah.
of building a community, and just that momentum kept going. And, as we're learning, as we now know, the internet is perfect for that in good ways and bad ways, right?
For sure. For sure.
And just a lot of put ourselves in luck's way, but we just took advantage of that in a way. We had, people on our team who could put it out there and then let the internet do its thing before anybody knew that that's what the internet did. That's the crazy part.
So as when I woke up this morning to do this conversation, I was, just going around through all the trades, Variety, Reporter, Wrap, Deadline, IndieWire, and there on Variety, they posted a brand new article, the top 100 greatest horror films of all time, and there at number 24 is The Blair Witch Project, which I think, guys, I mean, you are in great company with The Shining and The Exorcist, The Night of the Living Dead, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Dawn of the Dead, all these awesome, awesome movies. So, last question for Ed and Dan here is, what is the legacy of The Blair Witch Project? Start with you, Ed.
The legacy. I mean, first of all, I think all of us feel incredibly blessed that we were a part of it, because it was like the most collaborative. I mean, filmmaking is collaborative anyway. This was the most collaborative movie I've ever worked on. And it also taught me that sometimes the best directing is just to step back and let the people you hired do their jobs,
Sure.
And then now, it's just, like we, again, we're talking to you. We're doing 25th anniversary screenings all over the place, and people are still coming out, and people just discovering the movie for the first time and watching it, and it's just an amazing thing. It's just, we never thought that it would be, never thought that we would make a movie that would have this kind of impact, especially 25 years later, that people are still talking about it. So just really lucky and, happy that to have been a part of it, and to, built my, made me a filmmaker all of a sudden, and gave me a nice career, and also, just great relationships, with these guys and a lot of other people that I've met. And I just feel like thankful. And we go to these conventions, and people are like paying us to, for signatures. And it's just, we feel so bad charging people for signatures, but that's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
But I just love hearing the stories. That's really my favorite part, is just everybody has a story, and it just means so much to them. And for us, it's just so special that this movie has such a special part in so many people's lives.
All right, Dan, take us out. What's the legacy, and how do you feel about all this?
I mean, everything Ed said, I mean, I 100% agree with. And, it's a cliche. It's an artist cliche, but I still get a huge kick when a young filmmaker comes up to me and says started making movies because they saw Blair Witch. It got them into filmmaking. And there's nothing more flattering than that, and makes me feel more warm and fuzzy inside when I see a potential Scorsese or Spielberg that might, make some great movie down the road because they were inspired by what we did so long ago. So it really does make me feel good to be a part of that whole kind of collective artist soup. And just as Ed said, I really feel blessed to be a part, to be here, and still, people interested in this goofy little movie we did so long ago.
Well, I cannot thank you all enough for this amazing conversation. Happy 25th anniversary to the Blair Witch Project. And thank you to everyone for supporting Landmark Theater's screening series, Retro Replay Screening Series 1999, the year that changed cinema. What better way to finish off this series than with a screening of the Blair Witch Project on Halloween night, the end of the series, with this amazing conversation. Gentlemen, thank you all so very much, and all the best, and thank you for watching.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.